Let me ask you this, Dr. Woods. What do you think were the big stories of 2022, and what do you think will be the big stories of 2023?
Well, to me, the big stories of 2022 is this World Economic Forum persistent power grab. We've been reading about and talking about the globalists for a long time. I just never in my lifetime, thought I'd see the power move that they're making, basically in every area, whether it's the 15-minute cities or the mindset to digitize the central bank digital currency. I mean, on and on and on. It's like, gosh, we've been reading about this, studying it, and 2022, now it's really happening.
Yeah.
And I would say for the stories in the year 2023, it's not only is it not going to slow down, but it's going to accelerate. And so everything that's gone wrong in 2022, right down to digital voting, America is slipping into a sewer. Our border is wide open. We have drag queens in the public schools, and I don't think it's going to slow down. They're making their move. They smell blood in the water. And so, as we like to say, things are about to get real.
Yeah, I think they are too. That we're really seeing the rise of the Fourth Reich. And you look at the Great Reset, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, radical environmentalism, rise of anti Semitism, social justice, this globalism. Hitler, of course, was trying to spread his Reich. The rise of occultism, the Wicca religion, worship of nature. Our mutual friend Mark Musser wrote the excellent book, Nazi Ecology. Would you
Mhm.
agree we're watching the rise of the Fourth Reich when we understand the word Reich means empire or kingdom, and that we are watching the rise of the Fourth Reich?
Well, the term Fourth Reich is very interesting because Daniel 7:23 talks about the fourth beast, Fourth Reich, fourth beast. And it basically talks about how it would cover the whole earth and it would crush it down and devour it. And so all this talk about a Fourth Reich, I mean, to me, it fits exactly in with Bible prophecy, because what the scripture says is just before Jesus comes back, the world is going to be sucked up into one world totalitarianism. And whether it's caused by the Fourth Reich or the World Economic Forum, whoever, to me, it's irrelevant because it's spiritual. This is what God says is going to happen. And God is just, the devil rather, is just using these different players, whether it's Klaus Schwab or the neo Nazis, whoever he wants to use, he's just using them as pawns in a chess game. And we're seeing that develop before our very eyes.
Indeed, we are. World against Israel, divine institutions, cultural Marxism, global religion, global tyranny, persecution, mark of the beast technology, and apostasy. Let's start out with the world against Israel. Zechariah 12:3 talks about that. All the nations of the earth will be gathered against it. All the nations against Jerusalem. Zechariah 4:14, 2 through 3. And there you have a map, little Israel in red, surrounded by all that green, which is the green is mostly Islamic nations, are they not?
Yeah, that's a map they're never going to show you on any news outlet other than Frank's speech, because once you see that map and you see that green area represents Islamic countries and that little tiny dot represents Israel, it dispels immediately this idea that Israel is some sort of colonial, oppressive power. And that shouldn't surprise us, because based on the scriptures you just read, Zechariah said this is what the world will be like just before Jesus returns. And there's a couple of news articles there.
Paris calls eastern Jerusalem occupied after Israel deports Palestinian French terrorists.
Yeah. So, the most people probably in this article would focus on what Israel deported, but the important thing is what the French government said. I mean, this is official policy of the French government. Quote, France also took several steps to communicate to the Israeli authorities in the clearest way its opposition to the expulsion of a Palestinian resident of eastern Jerusalem, occupied territory under the Fourth Geneva Convention. So there's France's view of the nation of Israel, that she's actually doing something illegal. And that's what it means when it says occupied territory.
We condemn today the Israeli authorities. We condemn them.
Hmm. And the other slide I had up there was Joan Peters and the lawyer Goodyear. Those sources, are really good go-to sources because they demonstrate that you can say whatever you want about Israel, but you can't say she's doing anything illegal.
Hmm.
And yet the French government is saying the exact opposite, and the world is turning against Israel, just like God said.
Yes. Here is a book you're showing. Tell us why you're showing this book here.
Yeah, that's Joan Peters. I'm not sure if she's still alive, but I've seen her from time to time on Fox News a few years back. I'm assuming she's still alive, but basically, she went to the land of Israel as a liberal bleeding heart, trying to disprove the Jewish claims to the land. And she found that the actual data, the actual legal data in terms of title deeds and what happened after World War I, what happened after World War II, was the legal agreements that were made was so overwhelming that she shifted her position and she became a great defender of the modern state of Israel. And this is back in the day where we actually had intellectually honest liberals where they could be persuaded by data. And we don't have that today. We just have people that just get entrenched in their positions and scream and yell until the cows come home. But I have a great respect for Joan Peters and that book she wrote, demonstrating that truth.
Let's talk about this map you have in your slides today. Tell me about this map, please.
Yeah, well, that fits in with the second article where it says Netanyahu's new government must affirm a two-state support. The European Union Parliament has affirmed. So, in other words, the European Parliament has just come out and said, as the new Netanyahu government is coming to power in Israel, they have to affirm the two-state solution, which basically means get rid of, out of the borders of Israel, that territory there on your map called the West Bank. The preferred name for that is Judea and Samaria, because that's what the Bible calls it, and you'll see that in the next map down. But if Israel jettisons that, she's basically in a position that's indefensible. And that's why she's going to, I believe, be forced to reach out to the Antichrist for a treaty to protect her. And the article says the European Parliament hasn't done something like this, mandated this two-state solution since 2017. And now they're making this bold move. Israel has to give up as part of its policy Judea and Samaria, otherwise called the West Bank. And I believe that's preparatory for the treaty, that's on the horizon between the Antichrist and unbelieving Israel, which will launch the 7-year tribulation period.
Do you think they will give up Judea and Samaria as part of that? You think they'll agree to that?
I think anything is possible. What's interesting to me is even before Netanyahu comes in, they're demanding this. And notice, Brannon, this is coming from Europe. Don't we think of a Eurocentric
world government?
World government and an Antichrist most likely arising from the cultural inheritance of ancient Rome. And so the fact that all of these things are now in play, shows us the unique
and
prophetic season that we're living in.
Absolutely. And I'm not saying he's the Antichrist, but man alive, I would put Emmanuel Macron on my short list. I mean, with the stuff he's saying, we need a single global order and all the other stuff he's saying. And then his name is Emmanuel, God with us. I'm thinking, this is just weird. I mean, you'd have to put him on the short list. And then, I mean, not to be unkind, but I mean, he's married to a lady that's what, old enough to be his mother?
That's true.
And the reason that is of interest to me is that, again, and maybe some would consider this a stretch, but the reason that's odd to me is it makes one wonder if he's married to her as such a young man because he really has no affection romantically for women. What if he's like, she's a friend, I like her, and I'm a politician, I'll get married, she and I are great friends, she's a partner, a life partner in my goals and objectives, and I'll marry her. I could care less about her age because there's no attraction there. I'm just speculating. I mean, this would be my theory. And the reason that to me is significant is because the Bible says the Antichrist, rejects the affection of women. I don't know what that text means, but that's what it says, right?
It does say that, and that's another interesting parallel with Macron. I'm more
Had you ever thought
prone.
of that? Had you ever thought of that?
I had, but I'm more prone to the interpretation that the desire of women is the desire of Jewish women, going back to really Eve, before Judaism in Genesis 4, the desire to give birth to the Messiah. She thought Cain, I've given birth to a man child, the Lord. She thought Cain was the Messiah, and boy, was she in for some disappointment.
Yeah, she was.
But
So
there
what do you
all
think the verse means? What do you think
well
the verse means?
all the way through the Jewish line, there's this desire of women to be in Mary's position, and so the desire of women is a synonym for the Messiah. And so when it says he will show no desire for women, it's basically talking about he will oppose Messiah.
Hmm.
But that's Arnold Fruchtenbaum's view, and a lot of people would take the view that you just articulated, some kind of weird, sexual propensity. But anyway you slice it, Macron, we're not saying he is going to be the guy, but very easily he could fit a number of criteria.
Well, and just as you said a while ago, he comes out of a Eurocentric area.
Yeah, and that's the part of the world that's demanding Israel relinquish Judea and Samaria and acquiesce to this two-state solution. And that's the agreement that Israel is going to enter into, which will, with the Antichrist, whoever he may be, which will launch the tribulation. So here you've got Europe putting pressure on Israel to relinquish land which Israel needs for her defense. And you can see how the treaty, should Israel acquiesce to this, you can see how the treaty with the Antichrist, which starts the tribulation period, Daniel 9:27, is right on the horizon.
Yeah. Look at Daniel 9:27. You say, as you put in your presentation, the Bible says, Daniel 9:27, and he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he will put a stop to a sacrifice and grain offering, and on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate. So the Antichrist is going to confirm a treaty, then break it in the middle of the tribulation, correct? The 7 years.
Yeah, he's going to betray him, and he's going to desecrate the temple. And I did not send this to you because I just discovered it, but there's a brand new news article right out of Israel 365 News. Committee discusses whether a new minister will be appointed for the third temple. And the fact that they're even talking about this. And the reason this is such a big deal is the verse you just read says the Antichrist halfway through the tribulation is going to desecrate temple number 3. Well, how do you do that unless you have a rebuilt temple number 3? And here they are in Israeli conversation talking about temple number 3.
Isaiah 28, 15 to 18, because you have said we have made a covenant with death and with Sheol. And give us basically the meaning of this text. Why you threw this up here, please.
Well, when they enter into this covenant with the Antichrist, unbelieving Israel, God says you just made a deal with the devil. It's called a covenant with death there, a pact with death, or a covenant with Sheol, which is hell, meaning that they've turned to the wrong source for their security. They've turned to the Antichrist rather than Jesus Christ. And it's going to take his betrayal of them in the Jewish temple 3.5 years later for them to see the mistake that they've made.
Yeah.
And this is the instrument that God uses to bring this covenanted nation that's in rebellion against him back into the fold.
Indeed. And of course, you probably saw this week that one of the princes there in Saudi Arabia is talking about his willingness to make a pact with Israel as long as Israel will make some kind of way for the Palestinians. Did you see that?
Yes, and that fits in with Sheba and Dedan, Ezekiel 38:13, which I don't have there in the PowerPoint I sent you, but Sheba and Dedan in Ezekiel's prophecy, I believe, is Saudi Arabia. And what happens is they stage a lame protest when the Gog-Magog invasion, spearheaded by Russia, Iran, and Turkey, takes place. They protest, and yet they don't do anything to stop the invasion. And so the big question is why would they protest?
Because they have a covenant, they have agreements. We had a peace agreement with Israel.
They've entered into they're one of the nations that have fallen into the Abraham Accords, which really aren't peace agreements. They're normalization agreements where they say, okay, we will recognize the existence of the modern state of Israel if Israel opens to us trade, technology, tourism, and travel, the four T's, which would prosper even more Saudi Arabia. And now you can see why Saudi Arabia is not real happy with the Gog-Magog invasion. It's just absolutely fascinating to me that every tiny detail that God predicted is now in play.
Indeed. All right, let's go to divine institutions. We have world against Israel, now divine institutions. Let's talk about this. You mentioned conscience, marriage and family, labor, government, nationalism. Let's go to this.
Well, the divine institutions are basically things that the Creator has built into fallen creation to sustain fallen creation in spite of its sinfulness. And what they represent, and this is why the New World Order hates these, and this is why all of those 5 or whatever, 4 or 5 things that you had on the screen are now under attack, not just in the United States, but the world, is they represent a kingdom within the kingdom. They represent a loyalty people have outside of totalitarian New World Order government. And so you can't really bring in New World Order government as long as people's loyalties are divided. So all of those things have to be trashed. And, you know, you look at your headlines, all 5 of them are under attack today, whether it's conscience, patriotism, the family and marriage and family. All of that has to be swept out of the way to get ready for the New World Order.
Here's one headline you provided, PJ Media. Maine school socially transitioned 13-year-old girl without her parents' knowledge. I think I covered that on my news report last night.
Yeah, and that article talks about how this is becoming a pattern. You know, you have these kids in school, they run into a school teacher or some kind of social worker, and suddenly they start to transition in terms of gender fluidity, alleged gender fluidity, transition people's kids, and the parents have no idea what's going on. What is that? That is an attack on a divine institution, because God is very clear in Deuteronomy 6 and 7 that it's parents that have authority over children. So that authority structure has to be clipped. It has to be destroyed to pave way for the New World Order.
And that brings us to now cultural Marxism. So we've gone from world against Israel, divine institutions, and now we're at cultural Marxism. Stanford releases guide against harmful language, including the word American. So talk about cultural Marxism. New York Post is reporting Stanford releases guide against the harmful language, including the word American.
Well, as you well know, Brandon, because you've talked about this forever, cultural Marxism is about the control of language.
Yes.
And in fact, I was listening to somebody recently that fled from a tyrannical country, and she basically said in her interview that I heard that where she fled from, there is actually no vocabulary word for freedom. Meaning the people couldn't have a discussion about freedom even if they wanted to, because the vocabulary doesn't exist for it in her country. And so obviously the cultural Marxists have to change the vocabulary of a nation, you know, to put the proper soil down, which will spring up true, you know, totalitarianism.
Right.
And here's Stanford University. They've got a list of words you can say and words you can't say. And one of the words on the list is the word American. And that's an attack on another divine institution called nationalism. See, all these things have to be destroyed in order to bring in global governance. And that's why they're prophetically significant.
To global religion on our prophecy update today. And aren't we moving quickly to the global religion part?
Well, this is interesting because according to Revelation 17, verse 15, I actually think there might be a slide there of that. It talks about the harlot sitting on the waters.
Yeah.
There it says the waters that you saw were the harlot. Now, the harlot but in the Bible, harlotry always refers to false religion. It says the waters you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. And when you track those same four nouns throughout the book of Revelation, they always describe a global influence. So this is speaking of one world religion in the last days.
And by the way, you and I, you are one of the few people that gets this right. You are one of the few people that gets this right. And we also see it in Revelation 17, verse 1, talking about the harlot that sits on many waters. The harlot that sits on many waters. Revelation 17, I think that's verse 1. And then the scene changes, and John is carried away, and he sees a woman riding a beast. So one is a harlot sitting on many waters. One is a woman sitting on a beast. They're two different things. And then you come back to the text you're showing, and I believe indeed that's describing a one world religious system. I have a whole chapter on this in my book, The Coming Religious Reich, because people always just think this is all referring to the same system of Antichrist and Babylon. But I think there's, as you're explaining, two distinct systems. One is a global religious system, and then it goes to the woman who rides a beast. So the first one, again, a harlot who sits on many waters. Then he transitions and he sees a woman riding a beast. I think Antichrist uses this one world religious system to bring himself into power. And then after he doesn't need this system anymore, he's jealous of it. He doesn't want this religious systems, which I think worship will be largely directed toward Mother Earth, Gaia Earth worship, man. We're all a part of nature. We're all part of each other. And he wants it directed to him. And so about the middle of Revelation 17, you see that he and his 10 assistants turn, devour the woman, eat of her flesh, and burn her and strip her naked. And then he sets himself up to be worshipped. And I think at that point, somewhere along the way, is where the Antichrist is no longer demon-possessed, but Satan-possessed, and he directs the worship to himself, Satan possessing the Antichrist, and has himself being worshipped, fulfilling his desire of Isaiah 5 times, I will be like God. I will ascend to the heavens. I will, I will. What do you make of that?
Yeah, it's largely a recapitulation of what Nimrod did, because everything you walk through there, a city, a religion, the mother-child cult, and then demonic activity where, according to Babylonian tradition, Nimrod and Semiramis had a child named Tammuz who was raised from the dead after being killed by a wild animal under satanic power. So you have heavy demonic activity, faking a resurrection, I believe. You have one world religion and you have one world politics. And Solomon said, what has been will be again. And this is what Satan has always wanted to do. He gets to do it when the restrainer is removed, i.e. the rapture of the church. And so, what has been is happening again in the tribulation.
Well, let me ask you about the faked resurrection. What do you think is going on there of the Antichrist?
Well, John Walvoord in his Revelation commentary took that as a resurrection that really wasn't real, because his belief was only God can raise the dead. But I've kind of switched my view on that, because the exact same Greek word that's used to describe that in Revelation 13, I want to say around verse 14, is the exact same Greek verb that's used to describe Christ's resurrection in Revelation 2, verse 8. And so I believe that the Antichrist actually will physically rise from the dead, just like Jesus did. And that can't happen today. Satan can't mimic that today because the restrainer is still present. But when the restrainer is removed, Satan has his heyday. You just quoted the verses. He's always wanted to be like God. And so he moves into operation to do exactly what Jesus did, right down to the resurrection. And this is how he deceives the masses.
And I don't have a problem with that. Here's my theory. Do we see angels taking on bodily form in the scriptures?
Genesis 6, I would argue. Some of you have entertained angels unaware, Hebrews 13:2.
Yep. Je-
Abraham entertained a couple of angels thinking
right,
they were men,
right,
Genesis 18.
right. So we see angels taking on physical form of man, and what are demons?
Fallen angels.
So demons can take on the form of men. So if demons can do this, Satan is of greater power than the demons, right? So why couldn't one of two things happen? Antichrist does receive some kind of mortal wound, but instead of him being resurrected, Satan just possesses his body and gets up and is now possessing his body. That's one option. Or B, he just manifests himself into a physical form that looks like the Antichrist, and everybody assumes it's the Antichrist. I mean, like, you get a mortal wound, he's taken off. They throw a sheet over him, whatever they do, take him to the morgue, and voila, all of a sudden you've got Satan possessing his body, taking control of it, or again, manifesting himself into something that looks like it and replacing it. I don't know. I mean, I don't think that's beyond what Satan would be able to do. If angels could take on bodily form, demons are fallen angels. Why could Satan not possess the body of Antichrist, which then again fits the idea of the Antichrist being Satan possessed and then directing this worship toward himself, i.e. the Antichrist, which is really Satan in the bodily form of a physical person, i.e. the Antichrist. Is that possible?
Yes, and it's also interesting that the expression son of perdition is only used of two people in the Bible. A, the Antichrist, B, Judas. Now, what do both have in common? If your theory there is correct, Satan will actually enter the Antichrist around I would say, the midpoint of the tribulation period. And we have the historical record in John 13 when Judas went out to do the deed and betray Christ for 30 pieces of silver. The text in John 13 says Satan entered him. And so maybe that's why only Judas and Antichrist are called the son of perdition, that specific title in the scripture. You'll see Judas called that in John 17, I want to say around verse 12. And then you'll see the Antichrist called that in 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 3.
And not to pat ourselves on the back, but where else are you going to hear this kind of teaching, Andy?
You mean you can't hear stuff like this on Fox and Newsmax?
No, you cannot. No, you cannot.
I'm disappointed.
Yeah. So when we're gone, and there are folks that are left in the world, when this audience, everyone watching, we pray, and all of us are gone, and we've been removed, this will hopefully be archived on a website, and people will say, "Oh, we know this mortal wound that this one world leader just received, and now he's getting up, walking around." Back on December 23rd, 2022, Dr. Woods and Brannon Howse described to us that this was going to happen and what it is. So that's actually a guy walking around possessed fully by Satan. And there could be people on earth who, during that tribulation period, have become Christians during that tribulation period, who are seeking out our stuff online and watching this right now into the future and are getting an understanding of who this Antichrist figure is, who at this point is fully Satan possessed, right?
Yeah, and you also told me that you've got your station there on your outlets, archived in a good place where the cancel culture can't get to it.
That's right.
And so maybe everyone else is canceled but you and myself.
Yep.
Maybe that's why the remnant has some light in the tribulation.
Providentially, I believe God will allow some of these messages that we've been giving over the last few years to actually be preserved. What do you think? I think providentially God's going to preserve some of these things so that people have a context.
Well, the Bible teaches, that the wise man sees danger coming and makes preparation for it. And so, the way you're describing your system of payment, the way you've described to me the way you've set up your outlet so that the cancel culture, can't get its hands on it. I mean, I think God rewards that kind of diligence. And so, who knows, maybe God will use some of these things to bless people in the future.
Yeah, that's right. Talking about a rise of a false religion, look at this. 7 Israel News, here we have it. King Charles to recognize all religious faiths at coronation.
Yeah, that's most people would skip right over that. I think it is prophetically significant because obviously Charles is no longer Prince Charles; he's King Charles. Charles in charge, as we like to say. And under Elizabeth, they recognized the Church of England at coronation, but that's changing, where they're changing the vocabulary to put all religions on equal footing. We're not going to single out just the Church of England as somehow special and unique. All religions, including Islam, are equal. In fact, that article mentions Prince Charles' affinity for IFD, interfaith dialogue, which Brannon, as you know very well, more than anybody else, probably, that's just a way to find some kind of mediating position between Islam and Christianity. Chrislam, your friend James White was wrapped up in some of that stuff a few years back. But this IFD mindset, where you try to find some, common Abrahamic faiths between Islam and Christianity. I mean, Charles, now King Charles, has been, as Prince Charles, totally wrapped up in that stuff when you do the research on it. And so Charles, it's no big surprise that at his coronation, he wants all religions, put on an equal playing field, which is very different than when Elizabeth, was reigning as monarch.
Yeah, indeed. Let's go to global tyranny. So we've gone from world against Israel, divine institutions, cultural Marxism, global religion. Now we're at global tyranny. Daniel 7:23. The fourth beast will be a kingdom, a fourth kingdom on earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. So we're heading to global tyranny. Here we have the 15-minute city we've talked about so much. We got about 15-minute circle around your house at the center, and a 15-minute circle is that you can travel from your house by foot or by bike. I think after that, you're going to be penalized. You're going to be penalized probably with higher cost. Your digital currency everything's going to cost you more. You're going to be taxed for traveling outside of that. I guess unless you can prove you didn't get there by car. I guess if you walked or went by bike, I guess you'd probably be okay. Genesis 8:22, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. Why did you put this in here, Dr. Woods?
Well, because I'm quoting there an article from the WentworthReport.com, and it says, in the World Economic Forum's own words, this arrangement of cities is absolutely necessary to combat climate change. It's permanent climate lockdown is what it is. So the justification for all of these people giving up their freedoms so they can't travel more than 15 minutes from their house, is we got to protect the climate. And that obviously that's why they're brainwashing everybody with the idea that man is causing climate change. And yet if you just read the Bible, you'll get to chapter 8 and you'll see the earth goes through natural cycles. It describes 4 cycles there, one of which is cold and heat. And each of those cycles has nothing to do with human activity, human consumption. And I also find it interesting in that 15-minute city picture that you put up there.
Yeah.
I noticed that there's no church for me to go to. How do I get to my church? So I guess they're going to punish churchgoers.
Let's go back there. That's a very interesting perspective you just brought up. You're right. I don't see a church.
There's something there about, your own, I don't know, kind of churchy spiritual language. I can't remember where I saw it.
You have learn. Let's see. Take care of your health, get around, stay active, eat healthy, share and reuse. I don't see anything about church. I guess the closest thing they could get would be.
So how do I get to my right-wing, fire-breathing, fundamentalist, Bible-only church? I can't get there, I guess.
Do. I think those have been outlawed, and the Democrats already have a document they put in. They wrote. I shared the summer of 2020. They already wrote a document that if Biden wins, they want the IRS to go around and decide who's a church and who's not. Basically, at that point, they've definitely thrown away the Constitution, because we believe in the separation of church and state as defined by the Constitution, not as defined by the ACLU, but we believe in the separation of church and state as described by the Constitution, meaning the government's got to stay off the back of the church. We have the right to assemble and meet and teach and preach, and you can't direct to us our theology, our doctrine, and what we can proclaim. We have the freedom of religion. The state or Congress shall not interfere, period. You can't pass any kind of legislation that tells me, oh, well, you're not a church, I'm sorry, you don't define the church. The Bible does, and you can't dictate ecclesiastical matters to us. And that's the way it's been in our country. I don't know if most people know this or not, but did you know under IRS laws, a church does not have to apply for an IRS nonprofit status? They are automatically nonprofit. Did you know that, Dr. Woods?
I don't know if I'm up to speed on that, but the way you're describing church and state, this is exactly the way Thomas Jefferson, used the expression back in, what was it, 1803 or something like that, when he was talking to the Danbury Baptists. He wasn't even talking about the Establishment Clause side of the First Amendment. He was talking about the Free Exercise Clause. And they were worried that the feds were going to come in and regulate church life. And Jefferson says, don't worry about it. We've got a separation of church and state in this country. In other words, with the Free Exercise Clause, the government can't intervene in church matters.
Well, if you go, anyone wants to search, you will see IRS, the IRS rules, the IRS regulations, their own papers, their own paperwork. The IRS does not have to give a nonprofit status to a church. If they want to apply for one, they can get one. They can get a letter. They can get one. But the IRS has set out broad spectrums of what is considered to be a church, and you have to meet just a few of these to be considered under the IRS rules what as a church. And by being defined as a church, you're automatically a nonprofit. Why is it like that? Because the courts, Congress, would have to be making laws as to, okay, well, you're a church, you're not a church. So Andy Woods, you're at Sugarland Bible Church. You teach dispensationalism. You do not teach replacement theology. You teach with hermeneutical tools. You teach against LGBTQ. You teach against open borders. You are not a church. But the Church of Scientology or the Church of, the Latter-day Saints, well, we'll deem you okay. Not that some of these other churches might have an issue with some of these, quote, churches might have an issue with certain things. The point I'm making is the government has said, look, we're not running around defining whose theology and ecclesiastical practices, the government, Congress shall make no law, prohibiting the exercise thereof. So even the IRS rules, when you go read them, are like, we have some certain criteria for what we consider a church, but we're going to be kind of careful here. Well, why are they being careful? Because they're going to run into lawsuits from people like Matt Staver at the Liberty Council saying, have you not read the First Amendment? So I think most Americans might be shocked to find out that this is even reflected in our IRS rules on their own website. On their website. So anyway, it's interesting, like you said, no church here. No, what's that all about?
Well, persecution is predicted in Scripture. You'll see it in Revelation 17, verse 6, in the prostitute that we talked about earlier. It says that she is drunk, with the blood of the saints. And I just have a couple of news articles, dealing with global persecution, that's breaking out all over the world. There was a recent study done, according to this article from Christianity Today, and it says Christian employees feel silenced in the workplace, study shows. And also people need to pay attention to what is happening in New Zealand, where New Zealand is demanding citizens, and this is an article from newspunch.com by Baxter Dimitri.
Look at this article right here. Yeah, look at that. New Zealand demands citizens report conspiracy theorists who oppose government policies and terrorists. As terrorists. I mean, I actually watched this video. This is, I think we actually have it in here.
Yeah, if you go down there's a couple of embedded videos.
There you go. Listen to this. Listen to this.
Our Secret Service is launching an initiative to help us identify people who may have been radicalized.
Oh, good internet here.
Science details dozens of indicators that a friend or family member could be planning a terror attack. As Adam Hollingworth reports, the move comes as our spy chiefs identify a new and worrying type of terrorism.
Time was when the intelligence services were never seen, never heard. But now they're loudly proclaiming your country needs you to keep an eye on those you know and, if necessary, dob them in.
Recognising a potential warning sign and then alerting NZSAS or police could be the vital piece in the puzzle that ultimately saves lives.
To that end, they're publishing a guide called Know the Signs to help us all identify potential terrorists in our midst.
To pay attention if they are, and to be alert.
Seriously, is that an upside down 6 on her forehead there, dude?
I didn't even notice that.
Is that like a backwards 6? I mean, you couldn't pick this woman out of typecasting to play a villain, in my opinion. I mean, look at her. Good grief.
So that if they see or hear about something that seems off, that worries them and concerns them, they might have a look at this information to say, does this indicate to me that this person is on the road to actually committing an attack?
The
I don't know. I mean, maybe that was the crescent moon and a sword of Islam. I mean, who knows what that was? Good grief! But this is actually this is going global. You're believe in Bible prophecy, concerned about economic collapse, immigration. The 2008 DHS report said you're a potential domestic terrorist. I mean, this has been in the making a while.
Well, I found the article very interesting because we have a tendency to think that these things are just happening in the United States, you know, with the J6 protesters called domestic terrorists. No, these things are happening globally.